we're still talking about the Olympic Games in Rio de Janeiro. Now here to give us more on the year that was, we're now joined live by CCTV's Dan Williams in Madrid, Spain, and CCTV's Celestine Karoney here in Nairobi. Dan, I'll begin with you. Of course, there was heated debate before the Olympic Games about Rio's readiness for the Olympic Games. Do you think that the organizers silenced the critics this time round?
Well, if I take you back a month or so before that Rio Olympic Games, you have to remember that this was an Olympics against a backdrop of the Zika virus, which led to many people calling for the Games to be moved to a different city, a number of high-profile athletes pulling out. As you say, then there was also this concern over readiness. You had the Australia team moving out of the athletes' village, moving into a hotel, saying that there were problems with the accommodation there. That again put a question as to whether the rest of the venues, the stadia, would also have suffer from similar issues. And against that, of course, you also had these other issues in terms of protests against the Games taking place there, as well as concerns over violence and the like. So against that backdrop, you have to say that overall, once the Games began and then came to an end, you have to say that overall the organisers, for the large part, pulled it off. They did have a Games that went fairly smoothly. Of course, there are a number of issues, and it's very difficult to compare, say, Rio in terms of structure and in terms of smoothness, say, in terms of Beijing or in terms of London. But certainly, against that backdrop of issues, the organisers did a pretty decent job, and one that locals there in Rio can be proud of.
Right, Dan, I'll come back to you in just a moment. Celestine here joining us in studio. You were there at the Rio Games along with Dan and the rest of the team. What do you think the African athletes did, how they did in Rio? Did they give a good account of themselves there?
Well, Mahia, I have a yes and no to this question. When I look at it in general in terms of the medals delivered by the continent, it was not a much improvement from 2012, which was 34 medals. 2016 was 35 medals, 12 gold, 10 silver, 13 bronze. In Beijing in 2008, it was 40 medals from the continent. So yes, as a continent, we may not have delivered, but in terms of the medal count. But when you look at the individual performances, Mahia, it was quite a performance. You're looking at a continent that had two of the world talking about two of its top athletes. Wade Van Niekerk, the 400-meter world record and Olympic gold. Alma Zayana, 10,000 meters world record and Olympic gold. That was quite a performance from African athletes. Again, you're looking at a situation where there were countries that did deliver first-time gold medals. Sheikh Salah Cisse Taekwondo for Cote d'Ivoire, that was quite a performance for a country that had never won a gold medal at the Olympic Games. I'm also looking at a continent that also delivered in terms of its strong points. Kenya, Ethiopia, South Africa, Egypt. These countries delivered medals in traditional competitions where they actually do deliver gold medals and silver and bronze. So, Mahia, I think it was really a bit of everything, a mix of really everything. And most importantly also, we should talk about Africa's most newest state, if you like, in terms of sports, South Sudan. They made their debut at the Olympic Games. That was another milestone for the continent, and they may not have had, the performance they would have liked, and they would have, maybe, of course, they had more athletes in the refugee team than they did as a country. But, Mahia, they are taking the first step, and that was very important.
Indeed. Dan, coming back to you, you followed the China performance at the Games this time around. Overall, what did you make of the team, or rather of Team China?
In terms of medals, it perhaps was an Olympics that didn't quite live up to expectation. But in terms of memorable performances, that's where it really shine in many different areas, not least, of course, the women's volleyball gold medal that came right at the end of competition. That, along with some other stirring performances in traditionally strong Chinese events, such as the diving and badminton, table tennis and the like. But this was an Olympic Games that also saw a number of breakthroughs, not least in the cycling women's team pursuit, gold medal there, for example, as well as a number of other events. There was a bronze medal in the golf, for example, as well as other medals coming in track and field in events that China perhaps haven't been as strong in the past. But in terms of performances, of course, Fu Xiangwei, who of course rose to such prominence after her string of performances in the pool, but it was also really telling to see this more personable nature come across in her interviews afterwards. She became this internet sensation. So on top of shining perhaps an extra different light on these Chinese athletes that perform so admirably, you also then did have these memorable performances, even if perhaps the medal tally wasn't quite what many had hoped for perhaps before the Games began.
Right. Coming back to you, Celestine, now, of course, you did mention the refugee team. We did see a number of firsts at this year's Olympic Games. Just talk us through some of those that we saw in 2016. Before
I look at even the new disciplines, let's talk about the refugee team. And if I was to quote IOC President Thomas Bach, and he said that the idea here was to give hope to the thousands of refugees across the world, and that is exactly what this team did. I managed to interview some of them before the Olympics and during the Olympic Games, and all they kept talking about is that we want to be a symbol of hope. And really, that captures the essence of sport. It captures the true spirit of Olympism. And for me, I think that was quite a big win for the IOC as far as sport and using sport to effect change within society, to try and give hope. And I think the refugee team is something that everybody welcomed, and it was very celebrated. And Thomas Bach, of course, keeps returning to that when you talk about the Olympic Games in 2016. When you look at the two sports that were introduced, rugby sevens and golf, the rugby fraternity talks about promoting the brand of the sport, and that is the point of introducing rugby sevens. Fast-moving game, very interesting. Fiji winning a gold medal in the Olympics for the first time. All of that really, Mahia, brought a bit more excitement. It allowed teams like Kenya to compete in another field event, or rather team sport rather, that we haven't in the past competed in the Olympic Games. South Africa won the bronze medal, a first for Africa as well. That was good for us.
Guys, thank you very much for your insight there from the people who were there at the Rio Olympic Games. Dan Williams joining us live from Madrid, Spain, and CCTV Celestine Karoney. Thank you for joining us here in Nairobi.